By far the most famous painter of the Surrealist movement was Salvador Dalí. He called his work hand-painted, coloured photography of concrete irrationality, and it was immediately successful, perhaps because it gave viewers a convincing glimpse of the dream world. Yet despite his reputation as the archetypal Surrealist painter, Dalí's time with the movement was troubled and short-lived. Salvador Dalí arrived on the Surrealist scene in 1929, and although he was rather shy personally, he was obviously someone who was highly intelligent, extremely funny, and someone with a quite well-developed artistic style. Surrealism had issues with painting, difficulties with it, and it wasn't really clear what Surrealist painting should be. Could it be automatist? Could it really be the chance operation of a painter, over days in some kind of weird delirium? Was it enough just to make dream imagery in paintings, to make Freudian constructs for the viewer to psychoanalyze? Well, Dalí came up with a different type of Surrealist painting, something he called the Paranoiac critical method. And this painting, the Metamorphosis of Narcissus, painted in 1937, is his first fully worked out exemplar of that method. This is a very unusual form of avant-garde painting, and it's one which hasn't been seen in Surrealism up to now. The painting is, in a sense, almost academic. It's very smoothly painted. It denies the paint surface. Its compositional arrangements are also quite conservative. We can see that there's a very conventional relationship of mythological figures in the foreground, leading into a background which contains little buildings, little landscape elements, and smaller figures. I mean, we see arrangements like that in Claude and in Poussin. So you have the combination of a very conservative form of painting with this weirdly sick imagination. There's something very unhealthy, very strange, and very surreal going on in this painting. The painting as a whole is both an alluring and disturbing vision of desire overcoming rationality to the point of self-destruction. But that self-destruction is at the same time something, in Surrealist terms, marvelous. On the left we see Narcissus enraptured with himself, gazing into the pool, but still fleshy and living. He's there, he desires himself, but he can't have himself. This curious egg-shaped head is seen from the top, so you're seeing his hair. Then he's transformed, not as in Ovid, into a flower, but into a stone figure, to something that might be taken, perhaps, as an artwork. But Dalí is deeply ambivalent about that. The surface seems sickly and disturbing and is covered in ants. It's not obviously anything that's looked after. But the hand holds an egg out of which bursts a narcissus, a daffodil, the plant into which Narcissus is made. Then in the background, Dalí tells us, here's Narcissus again before his transformation. So a more or less functioning human, perhaps his rationality indicated by the chessboard pattern on which he stands. But he's also standing on a plinth, which is a strong suggestion he's already beginning to see himself as an artwork. And finally, mysteriously, right in the background, behind these mountains here, there's a kind of snowy Narcissus too. It's very unclear what exactly that's about. there's a group of figures here, and these represent normal heterosexual love. These figures, male and female, are posing for each other and desiring each other. So they're the opposite of the self-love that Narcissus has. But the way in which they're painted, the way in which they're performing for each other, doesn't necessarily seem any more rational than what Narcissus is doing. In Ovid's story of Narcissus, there's a definite moral message, which is not to let your desires run out of control, or certainly not your self-love to run out of control. In Dalí, there's more a disturbing enjoyment of the transformation that results from this desire spilling over rationality and conquering it, which after all the Surrealists would generally recommend. So in this remarkable, poetic and painterly performance, he gives us a vision of that transformation, not necessarily as something positive, but as something which can revolutionize our own perceptions and our ways of thinking about ourselves. There's a surrealist disruption of our normal ways of reading things, of our rational will to put things into well-defined boxes. Dalí presents a very particular mutation of the Surrealist movement and Surrealist painting. Dalí developed what he called the Paranoiac critical method. And this was an active, sustained way of engaging with irrationality in painting. If you look at the clouds, for instance, on the right-hand side of this painting, you can see figures and shapes in them, and that's no accident. The Paranoiac critical method is a way of simulating madness. Breton says that Dalí is both an actor and a spectator at the same time. There's an idea that he lets his madness run out of control to a degree, but at the same time, he's the judge of his artistic effects. And Dalí himself says, famously, the only thing that makes me different from a madman is that I'm not mad. The Surrealists immediately recognized Dalí as a major talent in painting and one who could advance Surrealist painting. And his works were immediately quite commercially successful. But at the same time, there was an uneasiness between Breton and Dalí. Dalí suspected Breton of being too authoritarian a figure, too controlling, and perhaps too moralistic. And Breton suspected Dalí of, well, precisely the opposite in the sense of a lack of control, of a kind of filthiness, of moral corruption. Dalí sometimes described the relation between them as being like father and son, but Dalí was definitely a difficult and troublesome son, and Breton a worried father. Later on, Dalí's single-minded pursuit of money becomes a problem for Surrealism, and Breton comes up with this wonderful anagram of Salvador Dalí, Avida Dollars. Dalí was very uninterested in politics in the way that many of the Surrealists were, and particularly Breton was. He was very much a bohemian dandy. He was interested in politics to the extent that he was attracted to charismatic political figures, and this got him into a great deal of trouble with the Surrealists. Surrealism is maybe the clearest example of an artistic avant-garde paralleling a political avant-garde. And Breton wanted to run the Surrealist movement with all the discipline with which the Communist Party was run. There was a point at which Dalí was brought up on charges, as it were, to explain himself before the Surrealists and before Breton. And the charges were as follows: a disdain of the proletariat. This one is pretty much sticks, I think. Dalí's dandyish bohemian character had very little to do with solidarity with the working class, and he professed himself to be profoundly uninterested in them. Another charge was admiration for academic painting. Well, that too has a certain plausibility to it, as we've seen the charge of Dali's painting, in a sense, is a collision of surrealist subject matter with academic style. And the last was to do with Dali's perverted admiration for Hitler, which was about Dali exploiting his subconscious, his dream imagery in images of Hitler, which were not sufficiently condemnatory. The real sticking point was whether Dali would join a political movement which the Surrealists had set up and tried to cultivate. So his refusal to do that meant his expulsion from the movement. It was a political test of orthodoxy and commitment, which Dali failed.